Welcome, Matthias. So we have 30 minutes, which is not a lot because I have an awful lot of questions. And you said, I sent them, but you didn't really look at them. You want it spontaneously, and we want to discuss the future. A little bit of the past, a little bit of the present, but we'll concentrate on the future. Before we get into the big, important topics of our time, no pressure, but politically correctness, media, the role of media in the election of Trump, things like this nature, I want to get the important stuff out of the way first. I hear you're a Berghain goer. Is that correct?
How do you know? I was there last Sunday. Did you see me there? Or what happened?
I mean, it's normally my Sunday hangout, but not in pre-tour. So you're more the
I go there occasionally. I mean, it's not that I'm going there every week, but I love it. I think it's the best club in the world.
And nice one. And who here is a Sunday goer rather than a Saturday goer? Hands up if you're on the Sunday crowd. So you do the Sunday afternoon.
Sunday afternoon panorama bar.
I can maybe put a hashtag right to be forgotten on this. Last time, this is an anecdote of Daniel Barenboim, which was interesting. Last year, he just was here in front of us and came on stage, and he had this great quote about techno music, where he said he sometimes has to hear it. He doesn't listen to it, but he sometimes has to hear it. I want to speak about Axel Springer briefly and sort of the status quo for you. Last time you shared that 50%, I believe, of the sales came from digital business, 75% of the operating profit. Where are you at now, 2 years later? And also maybe interestingly enough for a lot of people that work in digital media and the startups out there, how's sort of subscription of digital content going for you guys?
Well, I mean, of course, we are advancing in transforming the company into a digital pure play, if you want. At the moment, we are roughly 2/3 of the revenues are digital, 80% of the profits and 87% of advertising revenues are coming from digital businesses, and that is, of course, continuing to grow percentage-wise. Of course, subscription is super important. I cannot imagine that in the long run, great independent quality content can be produced and monetized by advertising only. And this particularly since the big platforms take the biggest share. 90 to 95% of digital advertising growth goes to Google and Facebook, partly with the content of publishers, and they have the, in a way, more attractive proposals for the advertising clients with all their data and tracking possibilities. So in the end, I think we need the second revenue source, and given the whole situation where people learn what a not trustful source that you cannot identify can do with wrong information, misleading information, propaganda, just intentionally false information, what that can do to societies ranging from England to America, Russia, Eastern Europe, Turkey, and other countries. I mean, it is pretty obvious that maybe trustfulness of a source and the serious effort to investigate the truth. I mean, we are not always succeeding in that. Publishers are also making terrible mistakes. But if they do, they apologize, they show transparently why that happened. So I think this idea of responsibility for truthfulness comes with a cost and has a price, and I think consumers are more and more willing to deal with it with digital subscription.
I'd like to speak more about fake news in a second, but you mentioned the big juggernauts, the platform businesses that you've, let's say it mildly and diplomatically, had some challenges with in the past. How is your opinion, though, in the sense of data ownership? Because in one way, they own a lot of data on us. On the other hand, you as Axel Springer demand more access to that data. Is that correct?
Well, of course. I mean, it's a kind of obvious fact that data are one of the most important treasuries in the present economy. Everybody wants the data. Everybody wants to deal with data smartly. I think there are several aspects to take into account. First of all, I think in the long run, the consumer will pay more attention to the concrete rules and ways how companies and NGOs and governments are dealing with their data. The idea that, I mean, everything is accessible to everybody and that this full transparency is creating a free world is pretty absurd, because data are always a power element, and they can be used, but they can also be abused, and you can do terrible things with data. And total transparency creates a totalitarian society. We know it from the Nazis, we know it from communist times, what totalitarian societies do with data and how they deal with total transparency. And we have a very current example, that is China, where this kind of point system is basically totally surveying the population and rating the behavior, the social behavior of people, because they know everything, and that has very serious concrete consequences. So I think a certain sensitivity, growing sensitivity for data is super important, and the fairness of an entity in treating customer data will be a competitive advantage. That, I think, is a kind of midterm trend we at Axel Springer take very seriously. And on the other hand, I think in the mid to long term, I could even imagine that we will have a totally new discussion, and that is really about a legal system that makes sure that the individual owns its data, and the individual owns its IP. I cannot imagine that it's just a power game of which company, which quasi-monopoly owns most data and does the smartest things with data. I think in the end, in a free society, the open space has to be protected, and in that open space, the individual and its data play a crucial role. So I'm very, I think it's a very, very important discussion, who owns it, and I tend to think that in the long run, it should be the individual that owns and controls its data.
In that world, though, which is a sort of a decentralized world, and distributed ledger technology, blockchain, etc., has been sort of the core theme of Tor actually 3 years in a row. Yesterday we had a whole day on blockchain in stage 2. In that world, though, where data is being decentralized and ownership of data is being decentralized back to the consumer, what role will a media company like Axel Springer play, also given the fact that you demand sort of intellectual property ownership, right, and are in favor of protection of it?
Well, I think, I mean, you can draw a line between that discussion and the intellectual property right protection. I think both initiatives, the kind of individual control of data and also the protection of intellectual property right, are going to the same direction. That is a decentral direction. I think the inventors of the internet, I had a long conversation with Tim Berners-Lee, and he is so critical about the current developments in the digital space, because he said our philosophy was a kind of really decentral, open space where everybody can participate, and where are more kind of equal rights and hurdles of know-how, access are destroyed, and so on. And I now see, Tim Berners-Lee said, I now see a world where it's a more closed philosophy, more closed platforms that are exclusive, and so on. So, in a way, just to try to combine these two things, I think we need a decentral move towards decentral data ownership, and the legal protection of that. And at the same time, we need a move towards intellectual property right, because if property is not protected in a society legally, that is leading to a society that is non-democratic. I cannot imagine, I mean, either it's controlled by super monopolies in a very kind of almost totalitarian capitalistic system, or it leads to super strong states that control that. But a fair competition, a kind of free market competition, will not prosper in such a world. Just take the concrete example, to be a bit more concrete now to your question, why it is so important for publishers. Take the music industry. The music industry has a protection of the intellectual property right of a record company since the mid-60s. It led in Germany, for example, to this GEMA tariff, that you have to pay if you want to use a song. Why was that for the music industry already in the 60s totally crucial? Because music was always a fluid good. Everybody could play a song in a club, or everybody could play a song in a radio station. So if it's not legally protected, not only the artist, but particularly for the ecosystem, very important music publisher or record company could not survive. Every music manager in the world will confirm that without that legal protection, there would be no music industry. And particularly now in the world of Apple Music and Spotify, it is even more important, and it is the basis why so many record companies are now growing and making healthy and serious business with streaming services and with these new platforms. It is all based on that legal system. Same in the movie industry. Why was that not important in kind of publishing of the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s? Because publishing a magazine or a newspaper was not a fluid good, not a liquid good. It was a physical good that nobody would copy. Nobody would take a newspaper, put it on a Xerox machine, copy it 100,000 times, and then sell it at a newsstand. Makes no sense. Now, since 2 decades, it is totally fluid. Everybody can, with a mouse click, copy either a whole text or a whole page or an element of that and can use it and monetize it in a different context with 0 creation costs. Yeah. And if that is going to continue, there is simply no incentive, no business model for anybody who creates content, being it a movie or music or a photo or a film or a text whatsoever, and particularly if it is about really serious and high-cost investigative journalism, there's no incentive for that. And that would lead to a society where, let's say, 2 or 3 big players, American tech platforms, Amazon, Facebook, perhaps Google, are controlling content creation and content distribution and will decide who of their 2 or 3 billion users gets which information is true or not true. That is a world I don't want to live in. Yeah. That's why I think it is super important. And I just don't get the criticism. I mean, you know that yesterday in Brussels there was this super important decision that the legal council said that they will vote for this intellectual property protection law. I think that is stimulating decentral innovation and competition and is perhaps weakening the big platforms a little bit. But why that is criticized as a kind of, that's the end of the open internet, I just don't get it.
It's interesting when you mention the big platforms and big tech companies like, let's say, Amazon also, how they see content and treat content themselves. It's almost a customer retention tool, right? The fact that Amazon provides free content or in their Prime subscription model is just a way for them to sell Prime, because if they sell Prime, you will end up buying a lot more on Amazon retail, right? So the content in that way is not a business model itself for them, but it is something to keep customers on their platforms.
Exactly. It's easy to use that in order to drive traffic, to generate data, and to improve a customer relationship, and then to monetize through advertising. Perfect. And there's nothing against it. I really encourage them to do that. It's just if somebody wants to take the creative product of somebody else in order to make money with it, so only for commercial purposes, then there should be an agreement on a license. How much do I have to pay to the creator? Because that is the fundament for every musician, for every DJ, for every writer, for every publisher, video creator, in order to survive. And only that basically stimulates diversity of competition and of offerings. And going back to the publishing, I think it is of a crucial importance also for democracy, because the only thing that strengthens democracy is the plurality of the views and of the information. There is fortunately no ministry of truth. Nobody owns the truth. So only the diversity of views and information and facts and the competition will really create a free society. And that's why I think it is of ultimate importance to do something that the ecosystem can prosper and can create that diversity.
And what about the argument, though, with the new copyright directive of the EU, among a lot of people in the startup world, that say, because of that directive, maybe the spreading of fake news will actually increase?
I think exactly the opposite is the case. First of all, this legal framework is particularly in the interest of the small players. The small blogger is the biggest beneficiary of that. The big companies, they can somehow afford to live in a different ecosystem and will somehow survive. But the small individual, let's say, early stage creators, they are most dependent on such an ecosystem. That's the first thing. And why that law would be good for fake news, I mean, it's exactly and precisely the opposite, because it creates a fundament for serious information or for ambitious creative product. that needs time and money to be produced. Fake news is the business model of either governments that want to manipulate other countries and elections. They can afford to do that. They don't need a business model. Or fake news is an instrument for capitalistic entities that want to manipulate their consumers. They can afford that. They don't need a business model for that. Fake news is a tool for criminal activities. So I think they also don't need a business model. So I just cannot see why that, I really cannot see. Perhaps somebody can explain to me, but I don't see it.
The argument in the sort of startup world that I've come across is that it sort of provides fear of sharing links.
No, it has nothing to do with... Sorry, that is misleading. That is already, I have to say, it is fake news. That is already fake news. Nobody will want to limit with that law the hyperlinks. Absolutely not. And linking things, of course, it's no issue. The only thing is, if you want to open and use an information that you want to use for commercial purposes, then you are legally obliged to agree with the creator on a license fee. And the creator can still say, I don't want it, I give it away for free because I'm more interested in traffic than in anything else. You are still free to do it, but you have at least the legal possibility to ask for that and say, if you want to use it for commercial purposes, you have to pay X% of your revenues to us, or you have to pay an upfront amount of money for that micropayments whatsoever. It is just establishing the principle that intellectual property is also in the digital world a value and a good that enjoys a certain legal framework, and that's all. And this whole hyperlinking thing is really misleading, seriously.
God, we are not making a lot of progress, by the way, but I love the discussion, not on the questions at least.
You can change the topic immediately. I'm very passionate about it.
No, I mean, but me too. Like, we just need more time. Next time we'll have more time.
Right.
But I do want to speak about sort of the role of media also, and I've come across a lot of your interviews in sort of the election of Trump, or generally sort of the rise of populism around the world. And I thought there were two interesting parts that I came across in some of your past interviews. One, the topic of political correctness. Something that is often heated discussion also in our office on lots of issues, you know, concerning also who do we put on stage at tour, etc. How do you see the role of that in the sense of, has that the fact that maybe some people feel the window of what can be said in public is narrowing, given rise to populist dynamics?
So first of all, just to lay the fundament, I'm very worried about global development where centrist democracies are getting weaker and weaker, with very few exceptions. Let's say in France, in Canada, most of the centrist democracies are enjoying weak leadership. Leadership is stumbling, population is turning away from democratic institutions. On the second layer, you have the populists. They are on the rise. They are the winners of the moment in countries like America, like England, like Poland, like Hungary. Then you have at the third layer the autocrats, like in Turkey or in Russia, where former democracies are turning into autocrat systems, where the rule of law does not apply any longer, and where very autocratic leaders are enjoying great support. And on the fourth layer, the real dictatorships, like China, like North Korea, like Syria, like Iran, are prospering, are getting stronger and stronger, and are basically enjoying perhaps the biggest strength of their leadership. This is a very worrying development. Yeah? For me, the most important thing in life, in our society, is freedom. Freedom can only be provided with democracy, and democracy is based on the rule of law and on human rights. And these things, these four pillars, or the two pillars for democracy and freedom, are seriously threatened and are basically declining. And why is that so? There are many reasons. It's a leadership crisis. Elites in politics, in business, in science partly, are doing a pretty poor job in connecting and communicating with people and getting their ideas across, or simply doing a serious and responsible job. Then, of course, certain phenomena of social media that are wonderful and have brought great advantages to societies, but they are a tremendous amplifier and accelerator of every sentiment, of every prejudice. By the way, also an accelerator and an amplifier of good things, of scientific progress and valuable information and access to know. And so it's not that I'm portraying it black and white. And I think in the end, by the way, it's much more white, much more positive effects than negative. But if we are talking about this rise of populism and autocratic systems and disinformation, then it has also to do with this amplifying effect of social media and digital content distribution and, in a way, unidentified sources. We touched upon that topic. And then I come to the third point, and that's the one that you have addressed. Yeah, political correctness. What is political correctness? If political correctness means diversity, free access for all religions, lifestyle, sexual orientation, nationalities, to different leadership positions and careers, of course, I'm more than for it, and I think it is super important. If political correctness means that you should behave appropriately and not tolerate intolerant statements and racism and nationalism and protectionism and so on, I'm also all for it. But if political correctness is a kind of very intolerant and unfree definition of what is a kind of consensus of what should be said and what should not be said, if it is really limiting the freedom of speech, or if it is simply, in a way, disentangling your true conviction and what you say, and if it leads to a degree of dishonesty and to a degree of showmanship of politicians and leaders on stages like this, just saying what they think everybody wants to hear and everybody can agree on, then I think it does something that can be very dangerous for democracy. It just gives people the very right feeling that this is a show, and it's just not true, and it's not credible, and it's not convincing. And then people are turning away from politics and saying, come on, these guys are not saying what they think, they are not doing what they said, and I just lose interest in that. And I think that is a very dangerous development, and that's what I mean if I'm saying, to a certain part, an extreme form of intolerant political correctness has also created a disinterest in democracy and probably has created the rise of populism, because then you have these people like Trump who say terrible things, but somehow it is so much in contrast to the PC speech that only for that fact people already start to support that, and I think that's terrible.
Thanks for the explanation. I have to excuse myself for the stage manners that we will go 2 minutes probably overboard in time. I'm sorry about that. But we have a few interesting questions here from the audience also. Great. Maybe we take one, you choose. What will be, well, blockchain we've discussed.
Well, let's take them in order. I try to be very brief. What is your investment and acquisition philosophy for the next 5 to 10 years at Axel Springer? We are mainly focusing on digital content, launches and investments, and digital classifieds, namely job classifieds, car classifieds, real estate classifieds. In these two areas, we are going to invest organically and inorganically, and our goal remains intact to become the leading digital media group internationally. We are already #1 in Europe. We want to go beyond Europe, did that in the US. So US and other democratic markets are getting more and more important for us, and we see a lot of opportunities. What will be the impact of blockchain on content monetization? Super interesting. I don't have a final answer, but we are very much focusing on blockchain opportunities at the moment, have a group of people working on that. And if it is, for example, about authentication and identification in a very decentral manner, and credibilization also, I think blockchain can play a terrific role and can be very interesting for digital content business models, and we are evaluating that at the moment. Do you already use AI-generated content in any of your businesses? What is your plan in this direction? The answer is yes, we are doing that. I give you one example. The sport team of Die Welt online is using bot journalism for soccer matches of the second and the third league. We could never afford to have reporters who are covering these small matches in small towns or cities in Germany, it would be much too costly. With the advantages of AI, of robot journalism, we create really good texts, very readable content that is covering all these matches in a wonderfully decentralized manner that attracts new readers, is very good for the reach of Welt Online, and shows, in a way, proves that this whole idea that robot journalism is taking away the jobs of human journalists is wrong. I think the opposite can be the case. We are very enthusiastic about it. We will test it on various fields. In the end, not everything can be replaced, I think, by robo. But a lot of things can be added, and a lot of things can be done better. Everything that is quantitative has to do with a lot of facts and statistics and figures is perfect for that kind of
Matthias,
content.
Great. Give him a round of applause. Matthias, I mean, we could do a speed session with you, like, 100 questions in okay. 10 minutes or something. This is incredible. They're kicking us off, but not now. Okay. We have 2-3 questions that I just really want to ask you that we can also answer briefly. Just one really on your future outlook, like where, 50 years down the line, where do you see the world headed towards? Exponential technology, singularity, hashtags, like, I mean, what's your sort of future vision, and is it a golden one?
On a daily basis, I'm a pessimist on purpose. I always care with the scenarios, what could go wrong in order to avoid it. On the long run, I'm a cultural optimist. I truly believe that the world is getting better every day a little bit. And if you look over the last 2,000 years, it has gotten so much better. With regard to life expectancy, quality of life, fairness, even violence. We are living in the least violent time of history, although it feels different because of media, fortunately. So that helps us to reduce it. So things are getting better. And concretely, scenario, I mean, of course, I don't know, but I think in 50 years, the world will be totally different with regard to work. I think people will focus on the things that AI cannot do, that robots cannot do. But most of the kind of stupid work that has to be done today will be done by machines and will be done better. So that creates a lot of life quality. Of course, we may work less, but we may work smarter. We focus on the real important things. And I think in that respect, we have to make sure that through all these technology possibilities, we are creating new opportunities, that innovation is creating new jobs. And then work-life balance will get better. We will live longer, we will live better, we will use technology in a smart way. The only thing we have to make sure is that the machines are serving people and not people are serving machines, and that can only be done through competition. I tell you, in the end, it is true for the content world, it's also true for the business world in general. Competition is the most important thing also here. And if that is provided through a good legal framework and through smart people who are really courageously advocating that, then I'm super optimistic that in 50 years the world will be much, much better than today.
Finally, is there a book that has been tremendously influential in your life?
Well, the last one is an obvious one. Everybody has read it, but Yuval Harari's Homo Deus, I think, is a super inspiring book and has a lot to do with the things that we just discussed.
Yeah, agree. Thank you so much. Thanks, Matthias Döpfner. Danke.